Iran.
Mm-hmm.
Now, does this clarification mean that you believe that an attack is imminent?
It wasn't. I thought that an imminent attack was possible even before the election. I'm glad that didn't happen, or before January. With Rumsfeld out and Gates in, Gates having encouraged 2 years ago the U.S. to negotiate directly with Iran and to give diplomatic recognition to Iran, I think that's really offers a good possibility that there will be no attack in the next 2 years on Iran. If Rumsfeld were still in, I would say the odds were, that is, in other words, if the Republicans were still controlling Congress, I think that the odds in favor of an attack under Bush would have been very high, by which I mean 80 or 90%. Very hard to stop, actually, very hard to stop. Now I think the odds are significantly lower, and the chance of actually lowering them further is much better. Because now a whistleblower who tells the truth about those plans has an audience in Congress. He or she could testify about those plans under oath, tell congressional committees what documents to ask for, which will probably be refused, and lead to an even more acute constitutional crisis, but actually could give the documents herself or himself to Congress, so Congress would have them. That just couldn't happen under the Republicans. And to do that under oath and with a degree of protection from prosecution, considerable degree. So, and moreover, with the information, the Democratic majority could be pressed by its Democratic constituents and a lot of Republicans to act on that information and to block the door to an attack on Iran. For example, I'll be talking about this later, but for example, Congress could pass a bill with, as they say, teeth, with budgetary teeth, meaning no money shall be expended for combat operations in or over Iran except by declaration of Congress, declaration of war. And essentially that's the way the Vietnam War was eventually ended. So that is, Congress does have that power. Now under the Republicans, you could make the gesture, but there wouldn't be the slightest chance of doing that, of achieving it. Under the Democrats, you ought to be able to achieve it, and if not, they should be fired. The people who vote against that should be fired in the next election. That isn't to say they should be replaced by Republicans, I would say, given the Republicans' track record, but it does mean they should be opposed in primaries by people who will promise to cut off the funds.
With the benefit of your own personal hindsight, which you've written about, knowing what you knew in 1964 and still requiring great courage, but coming forward 7 years later, what would you say to encourage people inside the administration now that know what's going on to try to head off an attack on Iran?
I would say that the possibility of actually affecting events is incomparably greater before a war has started than once it's started. For that reason, I do think that whistleblowing on Iraq is still worthwhile, but I can hardly think of a revelation by itself that would get us out of Iraq. The momentum there and the inertia is so great, even with a Democratic Congress and even with a Democratic president, if we get one in 2008, that the odds are against our getting out of Iraq, in my opinion. I'm thinking back to the Vietnam experience on that. But before the war has started, I believe that there's great chance to prevent the president from preparing and carrying out in secret a crazy plan. And attacking Iran would be crazy. One of the trio of crazy advocates of this, Rumsfeld, has now left. And so the chance has gone somewhat down, but we still have Bush and Cheney, who are, as far as we know, still committed to that plan. The chance of stopping them, even from within their own administration, with Gates and with Baker's influence and perhaps with his father's influence, Bush's earthly father, as he called him once, who is a better advisor, I would say, than any other voices that have counseled Bush, that there is a chance really of stopping it. So I would say that even though, say under a Republican Congress, they would be facing the likelihood of prosecution, that it would be well worthwhile to avert a war. Actually, the chance of prosecution and of conviction is much less now. They have Democratic committees to testify to. So in that position, I would say the risks are less and the promise of achieving something is much more. So I hope that people will risk their careers in a way that really none has done so far.
Let me say in that climate, in the current climate, referring back to your own experience, you had reportedly shopped the Pentagon Papers to senators, hoping that someone with immunity would leak it and you wouldn't expose yourself to possible criminal things.
By the way, I assumed at the time that I still would have a high, in fact I was told by a lawyer, that I would have a good risk of prosecution even if the Senate brought it out, as he put it, 50% instead of 90%. But 50 is better than 90, and I liked that. My main thought was that the Congress could do a better job than the papers. That I had the wrong belief, I think, that Congress was less likely to pick up an issue from the papers. That was mistaken. I didn't know the press. But that they would think, well, we don't want to dance to the tune of the newspapers. Well, that's one of the few tunes they do dance to, other than campaign contributors and voters. Campaign contributors at the top of the list. But the New York Times, say, is an agenda setter to a large extent. And Neil Sheehan was right. I should have given it to the Times right away. As it was, I did give it to Senator Fulbright, and I gave it to a couple of other senators. I gave material to Senator McGovern and to Senator Mathias and to Representative Pete McCloskey. And actually, each of them said they would use it at first. They've said somewhat the opposite later. But in fact, they said they would use it. And each of them then backed away when they saw the political risks. They didn't face any legal risks as under the Constitution, but they could have been punished in a variety of ways by the administration administratively. And they didn't want to do that. So I wasted 22 months in that way. And I would tell people now, do go to Congress, but the press at the same time. And I repeat, going to congressional committees now under the Democrats has a much higher promise.
Well, I'm puzzled a little at that because the time frame we're talking about is 18, 20 months prior to George McGovern's presidential campaign, standing on an anti-war position, and yet he was reluctant at the time to take a political risk of introducing this.
Well, you see, he precisely, by the way, I sympathized with him about this particular decision. I didn't really criticize him for it. Running for president, the keeper of the secrets, in effect, he would have been subject to very great charge by the Republicans in particular, had it been said this man can't be trusted to keep secrets, and so forth. So actually when I talked to him, I said to him right away, you're running for president, and are you sure really you can afford to do this? And his first reaction was he could. He said, my funders are different from the other candidates, and they won't mind this. He thought he could run on it. But it was this, a week later, that Gaylord Nelson, his friend, who was very anti-war, as much as anybody in the Congress, but persuaded him, you're running for president, you can't afford to do something this radical. And of course, no senator has ever done it.